I've been walking these roads under stars and the rain, asking questions that
Welcome back
circle,
to Vibe
yet
Podcast's
come
Conspiracy
back the
Club.
same.
Today we're discussing
Every
Tennakoon's
story
evidence on the
I
Charlie
hear
Kirk
holds a flicker
assassination.
of you,
I'm joined by
but
Charles
it
and Angela.
falters
Good to be here, Alice. Charles here, former ballistics expert and expert witness in court. I've seen countless cases where speculation attempts to outrun solid forensic fact, and I'm always keen to see if these new, alternative theories hold up to rigorous scrutiny.
And I'm Angela, a mathematical expert specializing in projectiles and trajectory analysis. I'm looking forward to delving into the geometric and physical evidence presented by Tennakoon. My field often provides clarity where other aspects might be ambiguous.
Excellent. Angela, the research by Tennakoon begins by stating that the official story of the Charlie Kirk assassination attempt, involving a 22-year-old with a bolt-action Mauser making a surgical shot at nearly 200 yards, is at odds with physics, biology, and human psychology. Can you elaborate on this central claim?
Absolutely, Alice. Tennakoon argues that the geometry of the shot, combined with the observed wound, dictates a very specific corridor in space from which the bullet must have originated. The official narrative, which broadly claims the shooter was simply on the roof, doesn't stand up to this precise mathematical scrutiny. Furthermore, the physiological demands of such a shot and the logistics of the event point away from an amateur.
At odds with physics is a strong claim. While I appreciate the desire for precision, official investigations typically account for these variables. We must be careful not to dismiss a narrative based on what seems unlikely without truly disproving it with solid evidence. What exactly does this corridor of truth entail, Angela?
Charles, the geometry is, as Tennakoon states, non-negotiable. A bullet travels in a straight line, and that line, from the point of impact on Kirk to the presumed origin, defines a three-dimensional wedge. Specifically, based on the wound track and the stage layout, the muzzle's position is constrained by an azimuth, or horizontal angle, between 20 and 28 degrees to Kirk's right, and a depression, or downward angle, between 5 and 7 degrees. If you know the range, say, d, you can compute the lateral offset, L, and the height, delta z. Changing one requires changing the others to maintain those crucial angles. This means the FBI's broad, roof zone, claim collapses into a razor-thin corridor. Anything outside this 8-degree by 2-degree ribbon is mathematically impossible for this specific shot.
And how precisely were these initial angles determined? The accuracy of any mathematical model is entirely dependent on the precision of its input data. Were we given definitive, forensic measurements of the wound track that can hold up in court? Because a few degrees either way can drastically alter this corridor.
Tennakoon's analysis is based on the observed wound path, the collapse direction, and the roofline geometry visible in the footage. While the source of the precise forensic data isn't detailed within this paper, the argument is that if those angles are correct, then the corridor is absolutely constrained. Tennakoon then provides worked examples for viable perches. The shaded blind spot under a canopy or trees emerges as the strongest candidate. At a range of 100 to 120 meters, it balances concealment with the required geometry, placing the shooter about 38 to 64 meters laterally and 9 to 15 meters high. This translates to roughly 3 to 4 stories up.
So, we're building a highly specific alternative scenario, suggesting a precise location, without fully knowing the direct source of the absolute measurement for those initial angles. That's a significant leap for a forensic expert. However, let's move on to the ballistics and biology. Tennakoon claims the shot was aimed precisely at the mouth-neck corridor, suggesting professional intent. They also argue a 5.56 NATO round with early yaw and fragmentation fits the wound better than a .3006 bolt action. What's your take?
The analysis posits that the target choice, the mouth, neck, isn't random. It's a critical area for hunters aiming for instant incapacitation. The observed wound, specifically the enlarged exit and tissue damage, aligns more closely with a smaller, higher velocity round like a 5.56 NATO, designed to yaw and fragment upon impact, creating a larger temporary cavity. A .3006, conversely, would typically create a cleaner, more direct punch through with less fragmentation.
A hunter's instinct doesn't necessarily equate to a military sniper, Angela. And while different calibers do create different wound profiles, definitive forensic analysis, not just better matches, would be required to rule out one weapon entirely in favor of another. Now, let's address the physiological claim that a 22-year-old could not have made this shot under stress.
Tennakoon argues that under the extreme stress of an assassination attempt, even trained SWAT recruits experience heart rates of 160 to 180 bpm, leading to tremors, tunnel vision, and a collapse of fine motor skills. Achieving such precision, which is an 8 to 12 centimeter target window at 150 meters, is deemed impossible freehand for an amateur. The idea of a college kid making a millimeter-perfect shot, packing up, and escaping unnoticed in under 2 minutes is biologically absurd given adrenaline's effects.
I've testified in cases where individuals under duress have performed feats that seem statistically improbable. While I agree that high-stress environments degrade performance, to state it's biologically absurd for a 22-year-old hobbyist to make such a shot is to ignore the element of luck, or perhaps even an individual with unusual composure. Unlikely is not impossible, and we cannot simply rule out a possibility because it doesn't fit our preferred narrative of professionalism.
That's a fair point, Charles. Angela, the document then moves into psychology and crowd dynamics, suggesting distraction choreography and a support team to facilitate the shot and escape. This is where the claims become much broader.
Indeed, Tennakoon suggests that the lack of clear phone footage, despite a crowd, and the mislocalization of sound, are not accidental. They are indicative of deliberate crowd manipulation. Sound bounce from 150 to 200 meters can confuse people, making them duck rather than scan rooftops. A distraction choreography, involving decoy noise or even allies shielding the shooter, could prevent muzzle capture on cameras. This transforms the crowd into camouflage, implying a coordinated effort.
Now we're truly straying into the realm of unsupported speculation. Distraction choreography, crowd manipulation, these are elaborate claims that require concrete, direct evidence, not just retrospective interpretations of how events unfolded. Where is the proof of these decoys or a coordinated team? Without it, this is pure conjecture and exactly the kind of alternative theory that casts doubt on otherwise legitimate concerns.
The argument for a group effort is presented as a logistical necessity to explain the successful execution and exfiltration. It lists a primary shooter, a spotter, a noisemaker, a crowd shield, and decoys, such as the bald hunter lookalike and the 22-year-old scapegoat. This choreography, Tennakoon states, is how professionals erase themselves from hundreds of phones in broad daylight. The lack of visibility of the shooter, the muffled acoustics, and the trajectory mismatch with a typical roof shot all contribute to the conclusion that the official story fails to account for the physical evidence.
Again, this reads like a classic conspiracy theory framework. When the official story has gaps, an alternative is constructed, often with increasingly complex elements like decoys and choreography to fill them. While Tennakoon's geometric analysis of the wound path is interesting from a purely theoretical standpoint, to leap from "the geometry is tight" to "it was a multi-person professional strike," without any corroborating evidence of a team or planted decoys is simply irresponsible. Official investigations work with what's verifiable, not with assumptions of elaborate concealment.
So, Charles, you're not convinced by the immortal verdict that the Charlie Kirk shooting was a professional strike?
I am convinced that the mathematical analysis regarding the possible origin points of the shot is an interesting academic exercise, and Angela has explained it well. However, Tennakoon's subsequent conclusions about a professional strike, an aged military sniper, group effort, and decoys are enormous leaps of faith based on interpreting absence of evidence as evidence of conspiracy. Without direct, irrefutable proof of these elements, it remains an alternative theory, not a forensic truth that would stand up in a courtroom. The official story, while perhaps imperfect, is based on the known and verifiable facts at the time.
My role is to analyze the scientific and mathematical claims. And from that perspective, the tightness of the corridor of truth fundamentally challenges a vague, anywhere on the roof, explanation. The physiological arguments against an amateur under stress, while statistically based, are also compelling. The analysis simply highlights that the observed phenomena are far more consistent with professional fieldcraft than with an amateur act. The math, physics, and biology, as Tennakoon asserts, do not lie, and they point to a highly specific, controlled event rather than a lucky shot.
That's all for today. A big
I've
thank
been
you to our guests
walking
Charles and
these
Angela and
roads
the Tennakoon
under
research provided by
stars
David
and the
Morgan.
rain,
I'm
asking
Alice, the host.
questions that circle yet come back the same. Every story I hear holds a flicker of you, but it falters and fades when it's missing the truth. For the truth you need proof, for the proof you need truth. Like the river needs stone, like the sky needs the moon. For the truth you need proof, for the proof you need truth.